a society in which some people observe the five pillars and some do not. So it begins to be polarized. The Priai elite were very attracted to modernism of the European style, and of course that also had little room for Islamic piety. One of my favorite stories is about a Bhupati in 1870 who was very attracted to everything Western and modern. He was speaking to a Dutchman who later reported this. And the Bhupati was praising Western science and Western pakayambaras and Western houses and Western reading, all the great inventions of the telegraph. And so the Dutchman said, does that mean that you would like to become a Christian? Well, the Bhupati said, I've thought about that, but I decided I would rather have one God and 4 wives rather than 3 gods and 1 wife. So secara rasional standing. Another reaction was in fact an anti-Islamic movement for the first time in Javanese history. And we see that reflected in 3 books which are very important. The first is Babad Kediri, which rewrote the history of the Islamization of the Javanese so that the Walis become bad guys. The Walis are evil people who destroy the greatness of Majapahit. The second is Suluk Gatalocha, which it's a funny book, but very, very offensive, a very abusive book about Islam. And the third is Surat Dharmakando. And Dharmakando basically put together the historical revision of Babad Kediri and the anti-Islamic jokes of Gatalocha. And the fourth reaction, most remarkable one I think in some ways, was Christianization. Again, until the early 19th century, there are no Javanese Christians. It just didn't happen. But from about the 1850s, up from the 1830s really, we begin to see conversions to Christianity by Javanese for the first time in Javanese history. And the people who achieved those conversions were not European missionaries. European missionaries had very little success in Java, just as European missionaries have had very little success in any Islamic country, or indeed in any Buddhist country. But the successful people here were people who were orang Indo, dari campuran, so they had control of Javanese language, and they understood Javanese culture. Extraordinary characters like Colin. Colin was, his father was Russian, his mother was a Priai dari Solo. He created the first Muslim community, the first Christian community in Ngoro, in East Java, near Kediri. And his teachings were sort of, well, the Christian missionaries thought his teachings were heretical. Here's his confession of faith, for example. I believe in Allah the One. There is no God but God. Jesus Christ is the Spirit of God who excels in His power. Now that doesn't even recognize the Trinity. Fundamental Christian doctrine is not recognized. It sounds more like the Shahada than it does like the Nicene Creed. There are characters like Kyai Ibrahim, Tungo Wulo, very Javanese, full of magical powers. Before he became a Christian, he could be in 2 places at once. But after he became a Christian, he stopped doing that because he said that was perbuatan setan. He had other knives. Kyai Sadrak, the most famous of all. Now, by 1900, the number of Christians, Javanese Christians in East and Central Java was kira-kira 20,000. And that's 1/10 of 1% of the Javanese population. So it's a tiny, tiny minority. But for the first time in history, the identity of being Javanese and being Muslim was terputus. It was now possible to be a Javanese, yet other than a Muslim. Then, in the early 20th century, this increasingly divided society became politicized. And this is one of the vital steps. In the early stages of anti-colonialism and of Islamic movements in this country, these social categories became reflected in formal organizations. So we had the political parties. Budi Utomo was hardly a political party, but it was really led by people who were from that group that doubted that Islam was a good idea. For them, Javanese culture had its roots in pre-Islamic classical culture. Of course, there was Sarakat Islam, which tended more to represent what we begin to call the Santri side. PKI, representing the Abangan side. PNI, also with its constituency largely from the Abangan. So we begin to see political differences which reflect those social differences, and because they reflect those social differences, they made those social differences stronger. Now let's pause at this moment and reflect upon the characteristics of this social polarization. One is conflicting interpretations of Islam. By this time also we've got the modernist Muhammadiyah. You've got Muhammadiyah, you've got Hindu, you've got these various organizations. Conflicting interpretations of Islam, Sharia-oriented, Sufi, modernist, traditionalist. Got conflicting social